always know when it was safe to open the door. We used it for years. It became muscle memory, the kind of thing you do without thinking, the way you always knock when you come home. The night I'm about to tell you about, I was 19, home alone for the first time in weeks. My parents were visiting my grandmother 3 states away, and my younger sister was at a sleepover. I had the house to myself until Sunday. It was Friday night around 11:30, and someone knocked on my front door 3 fast. Pause, too slow. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. Our family knock was not something we advertised. We didn't talk about it outside the house. I had never told any of my friends. My parents hadn't mentioned it to neighbors. It wasn't written down anywhere. It existed only in the 4 of us, a quiet little habit that had become part of how our family moved through the world. So when I heard it that Friday night, sitting on the couch watching television, perfectly relaxed, half asleep, my first reaction wasn't fear, it was confusion. I assumed it was my parents, that something had happened, that they'd turned around and come home early and forgotten their key. My brain went immediately to the most logical explanation. I got up, walked to the front door, put my hand on the knob, and then I stopped because my parents had called me 2 hours earlier. I had spoken to my mother. She was at my grandmother's house 300 miles away. I had heard my grandmother's voice in the background. They were not on their way home. I stood at the door with my hand on the knob, and I did not open it. Waited completely still, barely breathing, nothing, silence on the other side. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the television had made some sound that my half-asleep brain had interpreted as a knock, that there was no one there. I went back to the couch 11 minutes later. I know because I looked at my phone. It happened again. 3 fast. Pause. Too slow this time. I didn't move at all. I sat on the couch and I stared at the front door, and I felt my heart doing something it had never done before, not racing exactly, but stuttering, like it couldn't decide what rhythm to use. I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, still at my grandmother's, still 300 miles away. I didn't tell her what was happening. I didn't want to scare her. I just asked casually, as I could manage, if she'd mention our family knock to anyone recently. She thought about it, said no, asked why. I told her I was just thinking about it. We talked for a few minutes. I hung up. The knock came a third time at 12:43 fast. Pause. Too slow. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light in the house on and my phone in my hand, and I watched the front door until sunrise. No one knocked again. In the morning, I called my dad, told him everything. He drove home that same day, cut the trip short, didn't tell me he was coming, just showed up at 2 in the afternoon and immediately walked around the outside of the house. He found something in the flower bed beside the front porch. Footprints, 2 sets. Someone had stood there right beside the porch, just off the path, for what my dad estimated, based on how deep the impressions were, was a significant amount of time standing, still waiting. We called the police. They took a report. They checked the neighborhood. They found nothing conclusive, but here is the explanation, the one that took 3 more weeks to surface. My sister's ex-boyfriend. They had dated briefly the year before, and the breakup had not been clean. He'd shown up at her school twice, sent messages that made her uncomfortable, and then apparently gone quiet. We thought it was over. It wasn't. Had been watching our house. The police found this out after pulling his phone records. He had a friend who lived 2 streets over, and security camera footage from that neighbor's house showed his car parked there. Repeatedly, over the course of a month, he had been watching long enough to learn our knock. Think about that. He had stood outside our house on enough separate occasions, listening, that he had memorized the pattern we used to signal each other 3. Fast pause too slow, he used it that night, because he knew I'd opened the door for Ith, was arrested, charged with stalking. The case went through the system, and he ended up with a restraining order and probation. My sister still doesn't use a family knock. None of us do. Some habits are too dangerous to keep once someone else knows them. I bought the baby monitor at a garage sale. I know how that sounds, but I was 24, living alone in a ground floor apartment for the first time, and I was nervous about it. I'd read somewhere that people use baby monitors as cheap home security. Put one unit in the living room, keep the receiver by your bed, and you can hear if anything moves around while you're sleeping. It made sense to me at the time. It was $3 I bought. I'd used it for 2 weeks without incident. Living room was quiet at night. I slept better knowing I'd hear something if anything happened. And then, on a Wednesday night in February, I heard a voice. It was just after 2 in the morning. I know, because I woke up to use the bathroom and I checked my phone. I was almost back to sleep when I heard it through the monitor on my nightstand. A voice, low, almost a murmur, the kind of tone you use when you're trying not to wake someone up. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakably a human voice. Male, I thought, speaking slowly and quietly somewhere in my apartment. I did not move. I lay completely still in my bed, and I listened, and I told myself it was interference. Baby monitors pick up signals from other monitors, from phones, from all kinds of things. I'd read that too. I told myself someone nearby had the same model, and I was picking up their feed. I told myself that for about 30 seconds, and then the voice said my name, not clearly, not the way someone says your name when they're talking to you, more like I caught the tail end of a sentence, the last word of something longer that I'd missed, and that last word was my name, my first name, spoken quietly in my living room. At 2 in the morning, I picked up my phone. My hands were shaking enough that I mistyped my passcode twice. I called my friend Dara, the only person I knew who I felt comfortable waking up at 2 a.m., and I whispered to her what was happening. She stayed on the line. Wow. I got up. I checked every room, closets, behind the couch, under the bed, the bathroom, the small storage area beside the front door. Nothing. No one. The apartment was empty. The front door was locked. The windows were locked. The sliding door to the small patio was locked, and the security bar was in. The track, no one was there, but I had heard my name. I didn't use the monitor after that. I unplugged it, put it in a drawer, and tried to forget about it. Couldn't. 3 days later, I mentioned it to my building's maintenance man, an older guy named Pete, who had worked in the building for years and knew everything about its history. I described what had happened. I mentioned the monitor, the voice, my name. Pete went very still. Then he asked me something strange. He asked if the voice had sounded like it was coming from below. My apartment was on the ground floor. There was nothing below me except the building's utility basement. I said I wasn't sure. Maybe. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he told me something. The apartment below mine, the basement utility space, had for several months the previous year been accessed illegally by a former tenant. The man had been evicted from a unit on the 3rd floor 18 months earlier, but he had somehow kept a copy of the utility key. Had been coming in through a side service entrance, using the basement space to sleep. occasionally to store things. He was discovered eventually when a pipe issue brought Pete down there, and he found evidence of habitation as sleeping bag food wrappers, a small battery powered lamp. The man was gone by the time they found his setup. He was never caught, but here's the part that made me feel like the floor had dropped out from under me. The basement utility space shared a ventilation duct with my unit. Sound traveled through it clearly enough that Pete, when working down there, had sometimes heard my television, my conversations, my daily routines. The man living illegally in my basement had been hearing me for months. He knew my name because he had heard people use it through the duct from directly below my apartment, and a baby monitor, sensitive enough to pick up the breathing of an infant, is more than sensitive enough to pick up a voice drifting up through a ventilation duct from a room below. I moved out within the month. I never bought anything at a garage sale again. The notification came at around 3 p.m. in the morning motion detected living room. I was asleep in my bedroom, alone in the house. My roommate was traveling for work, gone for 10 days. I'd been living solo in our 2-bedroom rental for 4 nights without incident. I reached for my phone with that specific kind of foggy half-awareness where you're not sure if you're really awake. I assumed it was a false alarm. The camera picked up shadows, sometimes headlights sweeping through the window or the cat. Except we didn't have a cat. But you know what I mean. False alarms are normal. I opened the app, pulled up the live feed, and I saw someone standing in my living room. Let me describe what I saw as precisely as I can, because the details matter. The figure was standing near the far wall, the wall opposite the couch beside the bookshelf, standing still, not moving, just present. The camera's night vision made everything greenish gray. The figure was facing the camera. I sat up in bed. I was fully awake now. That specific terror, the kind that hits you like cold water, had burned through every trace of sleep in under a second. I stared at the screen. The figure didn't move. I watched for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 45 seconds. The figure remained completely still, facing the camera, standing beside the bookshelf, and then the feed glitched. 1 second of static, and when it came back, the figure was gone. I did not leave my bedroom. I locked my bedroom door, pushed the desk chair under the handle, and called 911. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, and I told her exactly what I'd seen. She stayed calm, told me to stay in my room. Units were on their way. The police arrived in 11 minutes. They cleared the apartment room. My room, no one was there. No signs of entry. Every window locked, front door locked, back door locked. One officer looked at my camera footage with me. The app stored the last 30 minutes of motion, triggered clips. We watched together. There was a figure. It was clear. It stood in my living room for 1 minute and 40 seconds before the feed glitched and it disappeared. The officer couldn't explain it. He filed a report. He suggested a few possible technical explanations, camera artifacts, reflections, but he didn't sound convinced by any of them. Neither was too. Didn't sleep the rest of that night. I called my roommate in the morning, told her everything. Everything. She was quiet for a moment, then asked me something unexpected. She asked if I'd noticed anything missing from the bookshelf. I went and looked. Everything seemed to be there. Books, a few decorative things, a small wooden box she used to store Miscellaneous items, chargers, batteries, that kind of thing. I opened the box, looked inside, then I called. Her back there was a small device in the box, black rectangular, about the size of a USB drive. I didn't recognize it. I'd never seen it before. She didn't recognize it either. It was a listening device, a small wireless audio transmitter, the kind available online, inexpensive, designed to look innocuous. The police confirmed this when I brought it in. Someone had placed it in our apartment. Investigation that followed was deeply uncomfortable. It came out eventually that our landlord, who had access to the unit for maintenance purposes, had been entering the apartment without notice, not for maintenance, for reasons the investigation made uncomfortably clear, involved a pattern of behavior. Across multiple properties he had placed the device weeks earlier. The figure on my camera that night was him. He had come to retrieve it, perhaps worried the tenants were getting suspicious, or perhaps the device's battery was dying. He had let himself in with his landlord key at 3 a.m. Assuming both tenants were asleep, he hadn't noticed the camera, or he hadn't noticed where it was pointed. He was arrested, charged with multiple violations across multiple properties. The case was significant enough that it made local news. Our apartment had been listened to for weeks. Every conversation, every phone call, everything. The figure on the camera was real. He was standing in front of the bookshelf because that's where he'd hidden what had come to take back. It happened at exactly 9:17 p.m. I know, because I was watching the clock, not for any particular reason. Just one of those moments where your eyes land on the time and your brain registers it for no reason at all. 9:17 p.m. a Thursday. In March, every light in my house went off at the same time, not a flicker, not a gradual dimming. One moment the living room lamp was on, the kitchen light was on, the hallway light was on, the small lamp on my desk was on, and then they weren't. Total darkness. Complete silence. I sat in it for 3 seconds before I heard from somewhere in the back of the house the sound of a door opening. I lived alone in a small house, 3 bedrooms though. I only used one, a kitchen, a living room, and a narrow hallway connecting everything. I'd rented it for 2 years. It was quiet. It was comfortable. I'd never had a single problem with it. Was not someone who scared easily. I say this not to sound tough, but because it's relevant. I had a high baseline for dismissing strange things, unexplained sounds, the house settling shadows that looked like shapes. I trained myself not to react, to find the rational explanation first. So, when the lights went out, my first thought was practical power outage. Check the circuit breaker. Simple, but the sound of the door stopped that thought cold, because the sound came from the 3rd bedroom, the one I never used, the one I kept closed because I had no reason to open it, and I had not opened. It did not move for a long time. I sat in the dark living room and I listened, and the house was completely silent. Whatever door had opened, if it had opened, had gone quiet. I pulled out my phone, used the flashlight, moved slowly down the hallway. The door to the 3rd bedroom was open. I was certain, absolutely certain, I had not opened it. I hadn't been in that part of the house all day. I had no reason to go back there. The door had been closed when I walked past it that morning, and I had not touched it since it was open. I stood in the hallway with my phone flashlight pointed at that open door, and I did not go in. Instead, I backed up, went to the front door, and left. sat in my car in the driveway and called my neighbor, a retired man named Gerald, who was practical and calm and had lived on the street for 30 years. He came over with a flashlight. We went through the house together. Nothing, no one. The third bedroom was empty, windows closed. Closet empty. Gerald checked the circuit breaker. Reset it. The lights came back on. He said it looked like a tripped breaker, not uncommon in older houses. Could have been a power surge in appliance drawing too. Much current, any number of things. The door, he said, had probably swung open when the house shifted. Old houses do that, doors that aren't perfectly level will move. I thanked him. He went home. I told myself he was right, but I didn't sleep in the house that night. The lights went off again 2 weeks later. Same time, 9:17, same total darkness, same silence. This time I was ready. I had my phone in my hand. I turned on the flashlight before ID even registered what happened. The third bedroom door was already open. I called an electrician the next day. Had everything checked. He found something in the walls that Gerald's casual inspection had missed. The house's previous tenant had installed a smart home system, automated lighting, connected to a timer and a central hub. The system had never been properly removed when they moved out. It was still embedded in the walls, still connected to the house's electrical, still running on its original schedule. 9:17 p.m. every Thursday. The system was programmed to run a night mode, turning off non-essential lights on a timer. It had been doing it the entire 2 years I'd lived there. I'd just never noticed because I was usually out or asleep by then on Thursdays. That particular Thursday I'd stayed in the door was trickier. The electrician found that the smart system also controlled a small motorized vent in the third bedroom, something the previous tenant had installed for air circulation. When the system activated, it triggered the vent. The vent's mechanism, old and slightly warped, produced enough vibration in the door frame that the door, which didn't latch properly, I confirmed this myself, swung open every time automatically at 9:17 p.m. For 2 years there was a program running in my walls that I didn't know about on the schedule. I didn't know about quietly controlling parts of my house on a dead man's timer. The electrician removed the system entirely, but I kept thinking about it for a long time after. The idea that a house can have a schedule you're not aware of, that something can be running quietly in the background, doing the same thing over and over on a loop, and you'd never know unless you happened to be in the right place at exactly the right time. That thought was somehow more unsettling than anything else. It was a white plate with a blue rim. That's the detail that undid me. Not a strange noise, not a shadow, not a locked door found open. A plate sitting on my kitchen counter on the morning of day 5, clean and dry, like it had always been there, except I had never seen it before in my life. I stood in my kitchen in the early morning light, and I stared at that plate, and I felt a specific kind of fear I had never experienced before. Not the sharp spike of sudden terror, but something slower, something, and that crept, because if that plate had been there since the beginning of the week, I would have seen it. And if it hadn't been there since the beginning of the week, then someone had put it there. Someone had been in my house. My parents had gone on a cruise. Their anniversary, a trip they'd been planning for a year, 7 nights. I was 22, home from my first year of graduate school, staying in my childhood home while they were gone. It felt easy and comfortable. I knew the house. I knew the neighborhood. I knew the neighbors. The first 4 days were completely normal. I cooked simple things, watched too much television video, called my parents from the ships. Why find nothing unusual happened? I am a methodical person by nature. I mention this because it's relevant. I notice things, I keep track, I clean up after myself immediately, dishes washed and put away right after meals, counters wiped down, nothing left out. My mother raised me this way, and it stuck so when I walked into the kitchen on day 5 and saw a plate sitting on the counter, clean, dry, centered. I did not wonder if I'd left it there. I knew I hadn't. I picked it up, examined it. White ceramic with a thin blue rim, not a pattern I recognized from our cabinet. I went and checked. Our plates were cream-colored with no rim. This plate did not belong to us. Someone had brought it into my house. I set it down carefully and stood very still and did what your brain does in that moment, ran through every possible explanation with increasing desperation. Maybe my parents had this plate somewhere I'd never seen. Maybe a neighbor had brought something over and left it. Maybe I was misremembering our dishes. I called my mother on the ship, described the plate, asked if it was ours. It wasn't. I asked if anyone had a key to the house. She listed the neighbors who had copies, 2 sets, both people I knew well. I called both of them. Neither had been in the house. Neither recognized the plate. I walked through every room. Everything looked normal. Nothing seemed disturbed. Nothing was missing. The house was exactly as I'd left it, except for one white plate with a blue rim sitting on the kitchen counter. I did not stay in the house that night. I called my friend Jessie, explained what was happening, and she drove over and took me to her apartment. I slept on her couch. In the morning, I called the police. I know a plate sounds like an absurd reason to call the police. The officer I spoke to clearly thought so too at first, but he came over. He walked through the house. He looked at the plate. Then he looked at the back door. The lock, he said, showed signs of having been picked. Not forced, picked carefully. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Someone with lock-picking knowledge had been entering my house. The investigation that followed was thorough and deeply disturbing. The man who had been entering my house was not a stranger. He was someone I had gone to high school with, a person I had known distantly, never been close to, but known. He lived 3 blocks away. He had been, the investigation revealed, entering houses in the neighborhood for over a year. Not to steal. Nothing was ever taken from any of the homes he entered. He entered them, spent time in them, eating in some cases using the space, and left. The plate was his. He had brought it with him. The police found more of his belongings during the search of his home. Small items, mundane things that had originated from various houses on our street. He had been inside my house on multiple occasions during that week. The police believed he had a pattern. He monitored which houses were occupied by single people or temporarily empty, and he entered them during the day while people were out. He had been in my kitchen. He had eaten there. He had left his plate behind, whether accidentally or intentionally. The investigation never fully determined. He was charged with multiple counts of breaking and entering. The case revealed a years-long pattern that had gone undetected because nothing was ever stolen. No one had ever noticed the signs of entry. No one had ever found something left behind. I found a plate, something small, something ordinary, something that didn't belong, and that was enough. My parents cut their cruise short when I told them. My mother, when she came home, replaced every lock in the house and installed a security system within the week. I still think about it sometimes. The idea that someone was moving through spaces I thought were mine, eating in my kitchen, sitting in my house, living briefly and quietly in the margins of my life, and the only reason I found out was a white plate with a blue rim sitting on a counter clean and dry like it had always been there.